Hello. Today we'll discuss regarding the terrorist victimology, counter radicalizations, and de-radicalizations. In these uh, lectures, we'll discuss on what is radicalization. So, radicalization is a process by which an individual or group comes to adopt increasingly extremism. So that are the 3 points are there, which political, social, or religious ideals and aspirations. So these points are very important while we discuss about the victimology. So that that rejects or undermine the status quo or undermine contemporary ideas and that expressions of the nations. Right. So that radicalizations can be both violent and non-violent. So there are multiple pathways that constitute the process of the radicalizations, which can be independent but are usually mutually reinforcing. So this is kind of the radicalizations, how radicalizations in the both sense, violent and non-violent, and there are kind of multiple pathways when you constitute the process of this radicalizations when it called both mutually reinforcing, right? So radicalization that occurs across that multiple reinforcing pathways, which greatly increases a group's resilience and lethality. So, furthermore, by compromising its ability to blend in with non-radical society and participates in a modern national economy, which radicalizations serves as kind of sociological trap that gives individuals no other place to go to satisfy their materials and the spiritual needs, right? So so then again it's a what kind of that integrations from that terrorism, how that often without de-radicalizations. So in popular our understanding, when we discuss about um, de-radicalizations, or then if we see how that this disengagement from the terrorist group will discuss in terms of that ideology. So, in popular understanding, if we discuss, the radicalization is often assumed to be the same as a disengagement from a terrorist group and its ideology. So, the terms de-radicalizations refers that primarily to a cognitive rejections of certain values, attitudes, and views. So, in other words, a change of mind. So, one is which decline to think that de-radicalizations comes first, and disengagement, which behavioral that distancing from the violent terrorist that modes, which apparently comes afterwards, or not necessarily so. So these are kind of disintegrations with these things. So so well-known John Horgens and Torre the Borgo have argued that convincingly that there is no clear evidence to suggest that disengagement from terrorism by bring with it de-radicalization. So, nor and perhaps more that controversially is that there clear evidence to support the argument that de-radicalization is necessarily accompanied to disengagement. So these are the kind of difference between that how that disengagements from the terrorism, and how that it's often and without de-radicalization. So these are the kind of that table to understand about de-radicalizations, how violence, low violence, and high violence is counter radicalizations in terms of radicalizations and engagement. When you see about the low and high that fundamentalism. So these are kind of disengagement from the terrorism, how it appears that most ex-terrorists have not so much changed their cognitive frameworks than their actual behavior. In other words, that disengagement without de-radicalizations might be the rule rather than the exceptions. So here again, that John Organ, which having that conducted dozens of interviews with the former terrorist since 2006, which concluded that uh, his personal experience and the terrorist personal experience in the, and then he mentioned all the interviewers. So while almost all of the interviewers could be that described that as the disengaged, the not a single one of them could be said to be de-radicalized. Right. So this kind of disengagement from terrorism, which group level de-radicalization, and it only in a few cases can be one observe a stimulation which radicalized and disengagement. So this disengagement can take many forms, which uh, desert or that defections on individuals, or as a that collective process which demobilizations as seen in a northern Ireland with the provisional area. So so this kind of the disengagement from the if you see from terrorism and radicalizations, likely that radicalizations disengagement on the group level has also been that conceptualized as a stage or phase process. So it is the kind of start often with uh, uh, that declarative disengagement which followed by, or behavioral disengagement followed by, and which organizational disengagement which leaving the group followed at the very end of the de-radicalization, right? So these are kind of major groups about basic issues regarding de-radicalizations, which are the top down or bottom up. So some we can see as radicalizations mainly as a top down process, um, and if you see others see the radicalizations which primarily as a bottom up, which process in which individual self starts, or a small bunch of guys of home ground radicals search for an organizations that allows them to follow a mission is larger than themselves, right? So the bottom up model which appears to be that generally the more appropriate for understanding many radicalizations process in western diasporas, but the two models which coexist to some extent. So these are kind of top down or bottom up about de-radicalizations. And this is that de-radicalizations of if you see about that several decades now, which uh, Islamist terrorists have called it a duty for mm, Muslims to engage in arms uh, jihad against their own rulers, against the Soviet, uh, and later against the Americans. 10,000 of have obeyed that, perhaps as many as 1 lakh over the past that quarter century, according to US government that estimates of the size and the terrorist group, right? So these are kind of the source who's saying that how that regarding US government, and at the same time how that more than a billion Muslims well over 99%, which ignored as a call to actions, which global that Islamist terrorists have managed to recruit that fewer than one in 15,000 Muslims over the past quarter century, and the fewer than 1 to 1 lakh Muslims since 9/11. So that what that distinguish they may who resist, if you see that majority of them, the stronger and that better ties of to family, friends, and the community. So these are the kind of points. They live in a that pluralist but cohesive society. Again, they have been exposed to counter radical ideological narratives. Again, they have this settled understanding of religions, and they exist non-violent outlets for that expressing their that frustration. Right. So there, if you see um, uh, terrorism, then we see that how they produced by a social and moral crisis of the intelligentsia, which serious terrorist movements have local roots and are not more that mere that products of outside manipulations. So these are the kind of points which, if you see, most terrorists are not insane, that fanatics, career criminals, or government that airlines, but more that moral people driving in extremism by their situations and by mistaken with political conceptions. Right. So, particularly in case of home grounds, young militants, that violence, radicalizations is not necessarily or wholly religious, intellectuals, or rational decisions. So, it's important to understand about the radicalizations of disengagement, how they works together, or how they oppose. So further in this in group, which peer pressures and internal code of honor can render that violence in certain social context the most that obvious routine of these things. Right. So these are the kind of points to go through things regarding this de-radicalization and disengagement. So you can think. Uh, okay. Thank you.